Look, it's great to be here. Did everybody enjoy Election Day as much as I did?
Oh, yes.
Is everybody still in a good mood?
Yeah.
Well, there's no question that the country's better off than it was a week ago, but as John was just mentioning, still an open question in terms of whether the K Street Republicans, who are soon to take power in the House of Representatives, are up to the task of cutting spending and reducing the deficit and bringing the national debt under control. Before the election, the House Republican leaders issued a pledge to America describing how they plan to govern when they take control. And the most substantive promise in the whole document was to cut government spending to pre-stimulus, pre-bailout levels, saving about $100 billion a year. That sounds like a good start, but it's really not. First of all, that's $100 billion out of a $3.7 trillion budget. And second, in the 10-year forecast submitted with his fiscal 2011 budget, President Obama already assumes a $75 billion reduction in discretionary spending in the year ahead, thanks to resumed economic growth and lower unemployment. So unless Republicans are talking about $100 billion in programmatic cuts, their promise may be a mirage. House Republicans also might respond that the pledge promises to put a hard cap on domestic discretionary spending. Yet Obama, in his State of the Union address in January, already vowed to impose a 3-year freeze. So it's kind of hard to tell exactly how far apart they really are. Let's take a closer look at some of these. Obama's 10-year forecast, well, we need to flip it. Can we flip ahead another one?
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Obama's 10-year official 10-year projection on what the on discretionary spending. And as you can see, it tops out this year about $530 billion in the current fiscal year and declines to about $460 billion in 2014, and then starts rising again with inflation back to about $530 billion. So you can see that his official forecast is pretty conservative. Now, whether it happens or not is another issue, but it's already pretty conservative. So what if the GOP kind of helps the president make good on those promises, which would actually be fairly much in line with what they've already been talking about? Will that put the U.S. government back on a path to fiscal sustainability? Not by a long shot. That's because discretionary domestic spending accounts for about $1.07 spent by the federal government, and that's where the entire focus of the Republican Party is going to be in the next 2 years. So let's take a look at the next one here. Okay, this is a chart of deficit spending, again, Obama's forecast. The deficit, according to Mr. Obama, will remain stuck around $1.4 trillion this year, bottom out around $700 billion by 2014, and then rise steadily after that, reaching $900 billion by 2020. And those numbers, as I shall show, are predicated upon highly optimistic assumptions regarding economic growth and interest rates. Now, it's already clear that economic growth will be at least half, if that much, of what he projected for 2011. So we're not off to a very good start at even reaching this objective, this forecast. But even under these fantasy land conditions, and this is the Obama forecast, remember, the current budget path will add $8 trillion to the national debt by 2020. By the end of the decade, the total national debt will exceed $21 trillion. So how big is $21 trillion? Is it like $21 gazillion? Is it like a stack of $10 bills stretching to the moon? I mean, the human mind can't wrap itself around numbers that big. So let me kind of bring this down to a personal level for you. Meet Fred. Fred's an average guy. He's like a warehouse manager down in Colonial Heights. And here's his lovely wife, Lorna. And she sells real estate. And here are their two wonderful kids, Muffy and Trip. So the current national debt stands around $13.5 trillion. That's $44,000 for each man, woman, and child in the United States. That means Fred and his family owe about a $176,000 share of that national debt. Of course, that's on top of their mortgage and their car payments, college tuitions, and credit card debt for trips, hairstyling. But the situation for Fred is actually worse than that, because 47% of the U.S. population pays no personal income tax. So the burden of paying taxes in this country lands on the backs of the half of the population that does pay taxes. So Fred and Lorna both work, and so they both have a pretty good, in a pretty high tax bracket, I imagine, like most of the people in this room. So as a practical matter, they're liable for double the national average, or like $350,000. That's their share of the national debt today. In 1920, okay, 10 years, at the outer edge of Obama's 10-year forecast, Fred and Lorna will probably still be working because they, like most boomers, haven't saved enough money to retire. And Buffy will have graduated from college, but her tuition debts will be so big that she'll be living at home and making ends meet by selling nose piercings on eBay. And Tripp will be living at home too, probably in a prison work release program. But anyway, based on the official Obama budget forecast, adjusted for their status as taxpayers, the family of four will be shouldering a $540,000 share of the national debt by then. Now you're really talking real money. Now, that's the good news. Here's some sobering things to think about. Obama assumes that the U.S. economy will grow at the rate of 3.4% annually for the next 10 years with no recession. Who believes that?
Nobody.
Yeah. So here's what that forecast looks like. The black line,
Missed that one.
oh, sorry, I missed that one. Okay. The black line shows projected growth in Obama world. The economic expansion envisioned by the Obama team is pretty comparable to the internet-fueled Clinton expansion, remember the internet boom, shown in blue. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't feel like I'm living in an economic boom right now. And I don't get the feeling that anyone is projecting an economic boom in the next 10 years. Apparently, the Federal Reserve Bank certainly doesn't, because they just rolled out quantitative easing 2, basically a desperate bid to get the economy moving again. Anyway, when I was writing Boomergeddon, I asked my friends at Chmura Economics and Analytics, an economic consulting firm here in Richmond, to create a budget model based on Obama budget forecast and his projected spending and his economic assumptions that he used, and run a few what-if scenarios for me. I wondered what would happen if economic growth averaged just 1 percentage point less than the 3.4% postulated by the Obama team. I also wondered what would happen if maybe sometimes late in the decade there was another recession. Not a bad one like the one we had, but a mild one like maybe the one we had 20 years ago. So the solid black line on this chart shows deficits in the Obama forecast over the next 10 years, okay? It kind of starts sneaking back up a little bit in the 10th year. The solid red line shows what happens if growth slows by 1 percentage point annually. And the dotted line ends the impact of a mild recession later in the decade. So what happens to the deficit? It shoots from a bit under $1 trillion a year under the Obama scenario to more than $1.7 trillion a year, and the national debt reaches $29 trillion. That's simply the result of plugging in a more realistic growth forecast for the next 10 years. So, what does that mean to our friend Fred? His share of the national debt by then, under this scenario, won't be $540,000. It will be $750,000. Okay, let's examine another assumption. In Obama world, interest rates stay low. The 10-year Treasury bill never exceeds 5.3%. What happened if the Obama team is wrong about that? What if interest rates climb to rates we experienced as recently as 1990, as some reputable economists like Tim Bond at Barclays Bank, who I quote in my book, say they will? I went back to Chimura team for an answer. So by way of explanation on this chart, I want to make clear to everybody, I'm not trying to stack the deck or stack the cards against Obama and make his suggestion, his forecast look bad. I'm just trying to put in realistic scenarios here. So we assumed, to be conservative, we assumed that interest rates would stay low for 3 years, as they are right now, while the Europeans work out their own sovereign debt issues and there is an investors engaged in a flight to quality here to U.S. Treasuries. Then we figured that only then, after 3 years, would interest rates start climbing and reach 10% by the end of the decade. So just by tweaking that one assumption in the budget model, the course of interest rates, the budget deficit in 2020 would reach $2.8 trillion a year by 2020, and the national debt would be $36 trillion. Okay, cool. Now, Fred's family share of the debt in 2020, $930,000. Okay, just for yucks, we didn't necessarily think this was going to happen, but we just wanted to see what it looked like if it did. So we ran one more scenario for the year 2020. What happens if we assume a little bit slower economic growth, interest rates and treasuries reaching 10%, and recession later in the decade? Not necessarily a likely scenario, but by no means an impossible one. Head for the hills, baby. Stock up on shotgun shells and barbed wire, because we're talking about a $3.4 trillion annual deficit. Fred's family share of the debt will be piling up at the rate of $40,000 a year. Okay, just to reiterate, those are not predictions or those are not forecasts. Those simply show what could happen if you use some different assumptions that are different from what Obama is using in his current model. And it shows you how incredibly sensitive the deficit situation is to a lower economic rate of growth or higher interest rates. But let's assume for now, let's assume we dodge those bullets. Let's say we make it past 2020 and the 10-year time horizon of the official forecast. What happens? Well, that's when the baby boomers enter retirement. And Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid shoot through the roof. In the decade of the 2020s, Medicare spending will increase from a bit over, go ahead. Yeah. In the decade of 2020s, kind of that area in this red circle, Medicare spending will increase from a bit over 2% of the economy to nearly 4%, adding hundreds of billions of dollars a year to spending in the federal budget deficit. Medicaid will pose a similar problem on a somewhat smaller scale, and it won't impact the federal government quite as much because the states share in the misery, but does compound the problem. Okay, so we all know that's coming. Everybody knows that baby boomers are retiring. But then there's another kind of problem that occurs in 2023 that most people really aren't thinking about.